Hello, I'm Tony Guida. This is my New York. Our city is famous for many things, and here's one you may not know. New York is home to the renowned Abraham Lincoln scholar and eminent historian Harold Holzer. Holzer has written prolifically on Lincoln and the Civil War. His latest book is a biography of the artist who gave us the immortal figure seated in the Lincoln Memorial. Monument Man, the meticulously researched and beautifully written life of sculptor Daniel Chester French. Bet you didn't know that name. Harold Holzer will tell us why next. Harold Holzer, good to see you.
Thanks, Tony.
Delighted to have you here. And this is some story. This really is a remarkable story about a guy most people don't know, I think. I mean, if you asked 100 Americans who is responsible for that great Lincoln statue in Washington, how many would know?
I hope more than 2 months ago when the book came out, but I'm not sure. He's not a household name. Few of the 19th century sculptors are. And frankly, more attention is focused these days on what statues we're tearing down than what we're remembering. So yeah, it's a tough slog to get him back out into the public where he deserves.
I'm surprised, with all you've written about Lincoln and the Civil War, you hadn't considered him sooner.
No, because I always write about the Lincoln era. And French, although he was born 15 years before Lincoln died, he had no interest. He was a bird watcher as a kid. Didn't even take note of Lincoln's assassination.
Yeah, that's a remarkable little item you have in the book. I mean, here's a guy who we now know is responsible for probably the greatest monument statue in this country. And on the and he's 15 years old when Lincoln is assassinated.
Right. And his future wife, who's much younger, never forgot the clamor outside her window. Of course, she lived in Washington, D.C. French lived in the country in Massachusetts. And, you know, again, he was a passionate birder. That was his interest as a teenager. He had a pal who became the most famous ornithologist in the country. It stood him well because he got a lot of commissions to do winged angels as an adult. And his bird watching stood him well. And his pal, Bill, would send him wings whenever he got one of the commissions. So we get these grotesque packages, not by FedEx, so they were, God knows how they arrived, of wings.
UPS.
So, yes, UPS wings. So,
but, you know, it's interesting that we should just tie the bow here, that because he's a bird watcher and he kept a journal, you were able to see that. And on the day of Lincoln's assassination, the only thing Daniel Chester French puts in his journal, his birdwatching journal, is something about a
first bird of the spring, April 15th in New England. I know, he's an artist. He's not a historian. He was kind of apolitical as a young man. He was interested in sculpture, farming, because his father was both a government official and a farmer, and girls. Those were his three interests as a young man.
Wow.
Right. So
mine too. Farming was very, very big in the Bronx.
Maybe then it was. Who knows? In the 1860s.
Yeah, I'm that old.
Right. But he gets commissions over the years, beginning with the Minuteman in Concord. So he learns his history.
We gotta talk a little about his. If you looked up the word taciturn in the dictionary, there'd be a picture of him next to it, or there should be. I mean, he just didn't talk. He was, you call him a crusty New Englander.
He was very, very New England. In fact, he was compared in terms of his sense of humor to Calvin Coolidge, which was not considered an insult in all circles in the 20s, because he was a man of few words, like 3-word to teasing kind of sense of humor. And he was asked repeatedly when he got famous, what did you mean by the statues of the continents down in Lower Manhattan? What did you mean by the statues of Brooklyn and Queens on the Brooklyn side of the Manhattan Bridge? What do you mean by the Lincoln? He would never answer it. He would say, look at the sculpture. It's all in the art.
It's all in
He had nothing to...
And,
nothing to say.
But he did have, what, 4 words to describe his Lincoln?
Job finished, well done. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was...
When people asked him about
that was Coolidge-esque, right?
Huh?
That was Calvin Coolidge-esque.
Yeah.
3 or 4 words, and that's about it. No, he wouldn't have been on a guest star on the nighttime shows today, because he just didn't, he was not a conversationalist. And he was just worked from, the same hours every day, whether he was working in Greenwich Village during the cold months or up at Chesterwood in Stockbridge, Massachusetts,
Right.
his summer home, which still exists. Beautiful spot to visit. His studio is still there. His great house is still there. The view that he loved so much when he first looked at it is still there. He was just constantly inspired, could not wait to get his hands in a vat of clay
Yeah,
and start
he was
to mold.
carving little, frogs and birds and things.
That's how he proved that to his father, who had him enrolled at MIT, where he was a dismal failure. But he carved a frog out of a turnip and put it on his father's dinner plate, and his father recoiled, cinematically, the way he wanted him to, and he had a local expert check him out, and when the expert said the boy's got it, he let him leave college and find his way as a sculptor.
Was that local expert May Alcott?
It was.
Luckily, this guy, or coincidentally, he lived in Concord, Massachusetts.
Fortuitously.
Fortuitously. That's a much better adverb.
I thought,
and that's why you're the writer.
But you sound better saying it.
Fortuitously. And his neighbors were people like the Alcotts and
Emerson. Yeah.
And it was was it May Alcott who sort of tutored him?
She was the local art teacher. And also, as we know from literature, she's the model for Amy in her sister's book, Little Women. She's the sweet one.
Yeah.
So, she was a great influence on him. She gave him a little sculpting tool, which he then carried with him wherever he worked, whether it was Manhattan or Stockbridge or Paris or Florence, Italy. He took that memento of his first encouragement. And yes, Concord was everything because it was an intellectual center. It was an art center. It was close enough to Boston so he could go to art museums. And when the town fathers wanted to do a 100th anniversary statue of the Minuteman, the local boy got the job. There was no competition.
And how did he get the job?
His father got it for him. His father was influential. His father was his agent, really.
Right.
Got him a lot of jobs. When he became Deputy Secretary of the Treasury under Grant and succeeding Republican administrations, Judge French, as he was known, would be in charge of building new post offices and treasury buildings around the country. They all needed decorative sculpture on top. No competition.
I got a son.
I got a boy for you.
Right.
And he got these great jobs in Boston and Philadelphia and made a poor living that way, but he made a living and kept it.
The thing that's striking about the Minuteman is he's 23 years old when he gets this commission,
right? Because
his father got it for him. He's never made a statue. You quote him as saying, "I wonder if I can do it." He's never done it.
He's just done clay models. Now the clay has to be transferred into first life size, and it has to have a plaster mold made before he can ship it off to a bronze foundry. And you have to turn it upside down and fill this thing with wet plaster. And as he's doing that, the head came off. And he and his father are clinging to the head as the wet plaster is leaking out, and they almost lost it. He didn't know the technique.
Yeah.
And he learned. And by the way, amazingly enough, with no schooling beyond, a few art instructors, he made this terrific statue that, in case anybody hasn't noticed, became the logo for everything from war bonds to U.S. savings bonds to the National Rifle Association to the earliest forms of Jell-O, ready in a minute.
Oh,
Minuteman.
read it, yes.
Yeah, so that thing became a brand. His very first time out. They finally gave him $1,000 as a thank you after it became so well reviewed and helped make Concord even into a major tourist destination, to go to the old bridge and see it.
I want to go to how you start the book, and which is at the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial in 1922. And I'm sort of embarrassed to say I didn't know any of this, but it was a gut-wrenching. Your account, I found it gut-wrenching because this memorial to this great emancipator was, I've heard you refer to it as the memorial from, the ceremony from hell.
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk about that.
So two things happened. One happened on the speaker's platform, and one happened in the audience. So first, the audience. African Americans got to the spot early because of their affection for and respect for Lincoln. And they got good seats, and they waited in this brutal sun. You see a lot of umbrellas in the photographs, but that was for the sun. And before the ceremony was to start, the mounted police came and rousted the people of color out of their seats and forced them back to a segregated section way at the back where the reflecting pool is today, where they had to sit on benches without backs. And they were replaced in the audience by Confederate veterans in their tattered Confederate uniforms. They got the places of honor. So this was an event that was supposed to canonize sectional reconciliation. Racial reconciliation was not on the agenda that day. And a lot of African Americans left. I mean, it was pretty insulting. The first African American Rhodes Scholar was there, some public officials from DC. They decided to call it a day, and rightly so. So if you read the reviews of the day in the New York Times and the New York Daily Herald Tribune, you read reports of a great success, of enthusiastic crowds, of a brilliant event and great sculpture. But if you read the black press, the New York Age and W.B. Du Bois's paper, The Crisis, you read about a dedication that really hadn't happened. It was so bad that the statue was considered undedicated. Now, there was one African-American speaker invited.
He was the president of Tuskegee?
Tuskegee Institute, Booker T. Washington's successor. His name was Robert Russa Moton. He wrote a great speech saying things like, until there is true equality in this country, Lincoln's unfinished work is not finished. And he had to submit his speech to Warren Harding administration press officers to have a look. They looked and they said, well, you can't say any of these disobliging things. Either cut it or you're cut. So he censored his speech and didn't say anything critical. And that's the speech that was heard that day. It was historically ice-blooded. It was stupid. The ironic thing, or the doubly ironic thing, is it was also politically stupid because African Americans were still largely Republican in those days. And Warren Harding, who's not known for this, was making some moves about civil rights, particularly because Democrats, because of the Dixiecrat bloc, were opposed to any civil rights legislation. Harding's wife was interested in civil rights. So as briefly as he served, you would have thought that he would have seen the sensitivity, but he didn't. And it was brutal.
Talking to Harold Holzer about his latest book, which is a marvelous account of Daniel Chester French, the sculptor, the artist who gave us Lincoln in Washington, D.C. The book is called Monument Man, The Life and Art of Daniel Chester French. I want to quickly jump to some of his other work, but leave time for the Lincoln statue. The Republic, a colossal piece for the Chicago World's Fair. I guess it was called the Columbian?
The World's Columbian Exposition.
Yeah.
It was supposed to compete with the Statue of Liberty. Gigantic, with a crown that lit up with electric bulbs. It was supposed to be Chicago's answer to the... It just wasn't great, not his greatest work.
But I think you think worse of it than that, because the quote you have in your book says about the statue, the pose made her look a bit like an overdressed bank customer caught in a holdup, reaching for the skies.
Right. Well, Statue of Liberty is so graceful, she's clutching the book, but he couldn't copy that, so it was both arms up. And yeah, it was a little bit like Your Money or Your Life, Jack Benny moment.
Right.
Yeah. You know, it was a tourist attraction too. And again, really helped him, because I think from that point on, from the 1890s on, especially with the death of his slightly older and slightly more successful colleague, Augustus St. Gaudens, Daniel Chester French became the most famous and richly rewarded sculptor in America. And in those days, they got great commissions, very lucrative commissions, and they were celebrities. The way artists are now, the way painters are now.
Yeah, and selling for hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
We should take notice of alma mater. He's
got a lot of things in New York.
Yeah, which was at Columbia,
Still
which I
is.
guess still is.
Still is. Got moved in after
the
it was
Vietnam.
it was not hit by, but some demonstrator put an explosive device on it to protest both Vietnam and the Columbia University administration crackdowns on demonstrations. Anyway, the little bomb went off, and it blew a hole in the chair that alma mater is sitting in. So the president hauled it off campus to punish the students. But it came back. It's been there ever since. It was once almost hit by a baseball, hit by Lou Gehrig when he was a
famous
Columbia baseball player.
Baseball player. What else? Well, you mentioned the Four Continents. That's downtown at the Customs House.
At the Customs House, which was a huge commission in those days. So he did 4 continents. They're a little politically incorrect today. Sleeping half-naked Africa, a very bold American continent. But again, tourist attractions. The William Morris Hunt Memorial is on 71st Street and Central Park on the east side on 5th Avenue. Tribute to the architect who did the Metropolitan Museum and the other great buildings in New York. So his mark is on New York. He did some things for the one-time NYU Hall of Fame, now at Hostos Community College, which was once the most popular tourist attraction in New York, aside from Grant's tomb, and now is virtually unvisited by anyone. So he did a few sculptures there. And he did these 2 colossal figures representing Brooklyn and Queens.
For the bridge.
For the Brooklyn side, the Brooklyn side of the bridge. Robert Moses, he has to be a villain in every story.
Right.
My friend Robert Caro would be pleased.
Yes.
He ordered them moved because he wanted to widen the approach to the bridge. So now they're on the steps of the Brooklyn Museum.
There's also a huge plaster, cast of Lincoln's head, and it's sitting in the
New York
Historical Society. And tell what that is.
It's a great story. So he designed the statue for the Lincoln Memorial without seeing the building, but he knew the dimensions. Anyway, he miscalculated. He was going to do a 12-foot high enthroned statue. He went down to look at the atrium and he said, I paraphrase or I invent, what have I done? It's going to be swallowed up whole by this vast room. I've got to make it 19 feet. It's got to be 50% higher than what I contracted for and what they're paying me for. In other words, I need another 50% of the money because it's got to be bigger. And the congressional leaders who were funding it said, forget about it. We budgeted a $50,000 commission and X blocks of marble. He said, no, I need 28 blocks. Anyway, they wouldn't listen. So he made a cast of the head that he had designed in the shape or in the dimensions of a 19-foot
in other words,
statue. To fit a
what he
19-foot
was
torso.
Conceiving had to be much bigger, so it's going to be 19 feet, and this would be the head.
This would be proportionate. And he took it down to D.C. He had it strung up by ropes in exactly the spot, and it was suspended, dangling back and forth. And then he brought congressional leaders, and he brought Lincoln's son, Robert, to look at this conception. And they said, of course this is right. This is perfect. How could it ever have been smaller? And he got the extra $25,000 and the extra marble, and they proceeded to do the really perfectly proportioned seated Lincoln that we see today. So the head made its way to the New York Historical Society.
You mentioned Robert Lincoln, Lincoln's only son, was at the dedication, of course, and of course so was French. But we don't know whether they were aware or what it mattered to them that the ceremony was segregated.
Robert, who was a political person in his own right, he was Minister to the Court of St. James, ambassador. He was Secretary of War under 2 Republican presidents. He was often in his younger days spoken about as a Republican presidential candidate, but he didn't want to go back to the White House. He was kind of insensitive on race issues. He was the president of the Pullman Company late in his life. They had a pretty brutal strike where a lot of people of color were beaten and worse. And some mixed record, the son of the great emancipator, as you say. French was, I don't think he had much more prejudice than New Englanders of his day, came from an abolitionist community. He did get to speak to Robert Russell Moton after the ceremony, and Moton asked him where the marble came from.
The president of Tuskegee.
Yeah, and he
who was ushered out quickly.
Yeah, couldn't even sit on the rostrum. So it's hard to know, but I don't think they were fully aware, because by the time they got to the ceremony, the people of color had been moved away.
Yeah.
But they would have embraced the sectional, and remember the racial reconciliation aspect of the Lincoln Memorial, what it means today, because of Dr. King, did not start until 1939.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. The meaning this magnificent piece and memorial had then versus the meaning it has now.
So it was definitely about the states. All the names of the states are inscribed outside on this Greek-style temple, and the Emancipation Proclamation is not carved into the walls. The Gettysburg Address and the Second Inaugural, they're brilliant, of course, and the Emancipation was not brilliantly written. It was a legal document, which is one argument, but it wasn't what they were selling in 1922. They were selling, let's all be friends and let's maybe leave the aspirations of black people on the other side of the table for now, meaning forever. So it was that kind of tradition, but they didn't count on Eleanor Roosevelt. So Marian Anderson, the great African-American opera singer, is scheduled to appear at the Daughters of the American Revolution in Washington. How she got the booking, I don't know, because she was pretty famous, but when they realized she was a woman of color, they said, you can't set foot in this building, you're out. Eleanor Roosevelt arranged for Marian Anderson on Easter Sunday, 1939, to sing at the Lincoln Memorial. 50,000 people came, totally integrated crowd, and sat in the rain while she sang My Country 'Tis of Thee. And Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. Can still hear it on YouTube, by the way. It's an amazing concert.
And of course, the Lincoln Memorial being the site of the great Martin Luther King speech in 1963.
Which begins, we gather here in the shadow of a statue and that created a new image as well.
Yeah. We can't leave this without mentioning a bunch of brothers from the Bronx who were instrumental in creating
I knew
the
you'd
Lincoln.
bring the Bronx back into
Of
discussion.
course.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Piccirilli?
They called him Uncle Peach, was the oldest. Yeah. That's how I learned the pronunciation. So in those, sculptors did clay models, and then they did larger models, but he didn't sit like Michelangelo with the chisel and a block of marble and work for 30 years. He would hand off the model to marble cutters, and they would use the smaller model and create the bigger work, and French would supervise. The Piccirillis had a big, like a Black Maria, an early studio, a movie studio, in the South Bronx, very close to where Yankee Stadium rose. And there they carved 28 blocks of marble under French's watchful eye. We think he liked to go up there around lunchtime because one of the brothers always made pasta at lunch. Smart. And they, by the way, never assembled for inspection until they were shipped to Washington.
All the 28 or whatever blocks?
28 blocks. 21 exterior and the 7 flawed ones they put inside. And he sat, and they stood there, and one after another were hauled into place, and it worked, cohered perfectly. And then French did the seams and the highlights.
I have to ask you about jumping back to the standing Lincoln, which was done for Lincoln, Nebraska, when it wanted to commemorate Abraham Lincoln, which is the first time French, intensely studies Lincoln, and he talks about my Lincoln problem. What was his Lincoln problem?
Lincoln problem is what to do with his hands, what to do with his ears, and he studied everything. There was a big controversy going on at the time about a statue by a man named George Gray Barnard for Parliament Square in London. Robert Lincoln took one look at it, and it was craggy and informal and sloppy, and he went crazy. He didn't want to deliver it. He wanted it censored. And French didn't want to run afoul of Robert, but he also didn't want to mischaracterize the way Lincoln really appeared. And he studied enough to suggest to him that Lincoln was a man of dignity. He wore very fine clothes as president. He may not have worn them well. He may have taken off his jacket when he could, but that he was the model of dignity, and to portray him otherwise would be a betrayal.
And in terms of, and if you can tell this fairly quickly, in terms of how he portrays Lincoln standing, tell the story of he meets, or a woman meets him who had seen Lincoln?
So he goes to Lincoln for the unveiling of the model, the small model.
Yeah.
And a woman, an older woman comes up and says, I can't wait to see this. I knew Mr. Lincoln. And I just want to say, I saw him speak. And before he began his speech, he would always stand with his head down and his hands clasped in front of him.
This is the woman telling
The woman
French.
telling Dan French. And they unveiled it, and there he was. He had intuited that would be the contemplative pose that would most mark this serious, sad man before he began lighting up an audience with his words. And she came back to him and said, "You're not old enough to have been there. How did you do that?" And that, of course, is the mystery that no book can solve. How do these geniuses...
You solve a lot of mysteries in this book, Harold.
Thanks, Tony.
It's a delight to read, delight to have you here. Monument Man by Harold Holzer. Get it and enjoy it. Thank you. It's good to see you.
Thank you, my friend.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.